The neighborhood had always prided itself on its neat rows of homes, manicured lawns, and a sense of order that only came from strict adherence to the HOA's unwritten rules. Every house looked almost identical, fences painted the same neutral tones, driveways swept clean, and flowers aligned with surgical precision. For most residents, the conformity was comforting, a promise of stability in a chaotic world. Yet, underneath that facade of calm, tension simmered quietly. It was rarely visible, but anyone who had lived in such a tightly regulated community knew that even a small deviation could ignite conflict. The trouble began innocuously enough with a single backyard fence. A homeowner, eager to improve privacy for their young children and a newly adopted dog, decided to install a taller, wooden fence at the edge of their property. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, simply a sturdy, warm-toned fence that would create a sense of security. The neighbors, at first, barely noticed. Fences came and went. Some required HOA approval. Others were treated with benign indifference. Most assumed that minor changes were normal, a part of living in a suburban neighborhood where people wanted to feel comfortable in their own yards. However, not everyone was oblivious. Across the street lived Marlene, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. She was the type of resident who kept meticulous records of every minor infraction. A slightly tilted mailbox, an untrimmed hedge, a flower planted too close to the curb. Marlene had a reputation for quietly influencing the HOA board behind the scenes, ensuring that her vision of perfection extended beyond her own lawn. When she noticed the new fence, her brow furrowed. Its height was not egregious by any legal measure, but it exceeded the arbitrary limits she had established in her mind for what was acceptable. It wasn't just a fence. It was a statement, a challenge to her perceived authority. Marlene's initial reaction was silent observation. She watched from behind her lace curtains, noting every construction worker who measured, hammered, or painted. Her journal, filled with neat entries of minor complaints and neighborhood anomalies, soon contained a new line. Unauthorized fence installation at 342 Maplewood Drive. Investigate immediately. From that moment, the homeowner's life, previously peaceful and predictable, would be drawn into an escalating feud. The fence, though built for practical purposes, quickly became a symbol. To the homeowner, it was privacy, safety, and a personal project completed with care. To Marlene, it was a violation, an affront to her vision of a perfectly uniform community. Within days, small notes appeared under the fence, taped to the front gate, or slipped under the homeowner's door. Reminders of HOA rules, warnings about height limits, subtle threats about fines. Each note was polite on the surface but laced with underlying menace, suggesting scrutiny, oversight, and inevitable consequences if the homeowner did not comply. Neighbors began to notice the tension, sensing the shift in the usually quiet suburban atmosphere. Conversations in yards became subdued. Polite nods replaced casual smiles, and the faint hum of gossip started to circulate. Some residents whispered about Marlene's reputation, recalling similar incidents where she had pressured families to conform or submit to her interpretation of the rules. Others speculated on the homeowner's reaction, wondering whether they would simply adjust the fence or stand their ground. The atmosphere was charged, though the reasons for the tension were invisible to outsiders. In the days that followed, the homeowner attempted to engage in careful compliance, reviewing HOA guidelines, seeking permits, and making minor adjustments where possible. Yet Marlene seemed unsatisfied. Her surveillance of the property intensified. She timed lawn care routines, scrutinized sidewalk cleanliness, and even photographed minor wear on the fence's new paint. Every action taken by the homeowner was met with an equally meticulous counteraction. Subtle notes shifted to detailed letters, some bearing official-looking HOA letterheads, warning of escalating fines and potential legal action. The homeowner began to realize that this was no ordinary dispute. It was personal, calculated, and relentless. What began as a simple desire for privacy had evolved into a battle of wills. The fence, intended as a boundary for safety and comfort, became a flashpoint for control. Each plank, each nail, each angle of the wood was scrutinized, discussed, and judged. The homeowner's once quiet backyard transformed into a stage for silent warfare, where every visitor, delivery, or casual passerby might witness the beginnings of what could become a public feud. Tension seeped into everyday routines. Mornings were punctuated with careful inspection of the gate, evenings with lingering anxiety about what new note or complaint might appear. What had been a personal project now carried the weight of community conflict. Marlene, for her part, escalated her tactics subtly but effectively. She began documenting each interaction meticulously, compiling photos, timestamps, and written observations. Her journal became an organized dossier, a record she would later claim as evidence of HOA violations. Every detail was noted, every minor infraction magnified. To her, it was not just about offense, it was about enforcing order, asserting authority, and demonstrating her influence. In her mind, allowing this fence to stand unchecked was equivalent to permitting chaos. The homeowner, she believed, was testing the limits of community obedience, and she would not allow it to go unchallenged. Meanwhile, the homeowner grew increasingly aware of the stakes. A simple misunderstanding had morphed into a drawn-out negotiation of power and principle. The fence was no longer just a structure. It had become a symbol of independence, a test of courage, and a measure of resilience. Every morning began with a careful survey of the property line, every conversation with neighbors laced with caution, and every interaction with Marlene fraught with tension. The homeowner understood that yielding now could set a precedent, emboldening further interference and undermining autonomy. Standing firm, however, promised confrontation, scrutiny, and potentially costly consequences. By the end of the first chapter of this escalating feud, it was clear that the fence was more than wood and nails. It represented a collision of intentions, values, and authority. What started as a private improvement had awakened the slumbering mechanisms of neighborhood control, and the homeowner was now fully entangled in a conflict that would test patience, strategy, and the very limits of communal tolerance. The stage was set, the players established, and the quiet suburb of Maplewood Drive had transformed into the battleground for a feud that would extend far beyond a simple backyard fence. The homeowner understood that the coming days would require vigilance, strategic observation, and the ability to respond to escalating tactics without surrendering to intimidation. This was only the beginning. With the first signs of tension firmly established, the suburban calm of Maplewood Drive had dissolved into a quiet battlefield. The fence, now fully erect, stood as a silent monument to the homeowner's desire for privacy. Yet, it had inadvertently become a symbol of resistance to the unspoken rules enforced by Marlene. Each day, the homeowner would step outside to inspect the structure, half expecting some new warning or note tucked beneath the gate or pinned to the fence. These small communications had become Marlene's weapon of choice, subtle but psychologically powerful, a reminder that someone was always watching, always judging, and always poised to act. The notices began innocuously, at first just polite reminders of HOA regulations. Yet, there was an underlying tone, a careful manipulation of language that implied consequences without explicitly stating them. Please review community guidelines regarding fence height, one note suggested, while another subtly reminded the homeowner that non-compliance could lead to fines. Each note was timed meticulously, often appearing immediately after any visible work on the fence. The homeowner quickly realized that Marlene was orchestrating a psychological campaign designed to provoke stress, guilt, and hesitation. Neighbors had begun to take notice as well. Some whispered that Marlene had always been this way, a perfectionist with a flair for control. Others speculated whether the homeowner might overreact, allowing the tension to escalate further. But the homeowner was determined not to be intimidated. The notes were removed, read carefully, and stored in archive of each subtle attempt to exert pressure. By cataloging them, the homeowner began to see a pattern, recognizing that Marlene's actions were less about law and more about personal vendetta. As days turned into weeks, the notices evolved. Polite suggestions gave way to formal letters, some using official-looking HOA demanding compliance and citing ambiguous violations. Photographs were attached, showing the fence from multiple angles, with shadows carefully highlighted to suggest potential infractions. It was no longer a simple dispute, it was a campaign of escalation. Each communication from Marlene was precise, strategic, and designed to create a paper trail that could later be leveraged against the homeowner. The homeowner, aware of the stakes, began a methodical counterstrike. Every letter and notice was documented, scanned, and logged with times. Detailed notes were kept of every encounter with Marlene or any observation of her activity. The homeowner even installed discrete cameras, not for voyeuristic purposes, but to capture evidence of Marlene's escalating scrutiny. It was becoming clear that this feud was no longer a battle of fences, but a calculated war of documentation and leverage. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself began to shift under the weight of tension. Casual conversations that once centered on weekend plans or gardening tips now revolved around the fence dispute. Neighbors discussed Marlene's behavior in hushed tones, debating whether to intervene or maintain distance. A few offered support discreetly, sharing stories of their own minor conflicts with her, while others expressed unease, wary of becoming entangled in a growing spectacle. The homeowner observed all of this silently, recognizing that public opinion might be a weapon in itself, a factor that could either diffuse or amplify the conflict. The homeowner's evenings became a cycle of vigilance and analysis. Each time the mail was collected, the mailbox was inspected for potential notes. Each glance at the fence was accompanied by consideration of photographic angles, lighting, and potential weaknesses in its construction. Even routine tasks like watering the garden or taking out the trash were scrutinized through a lens of strategic planning, each action assessed for possible scrutiny or misinterpretation. The fence had become more than a barrier. It had become a symbol of autonomy, a statement of resistance against unchecked authority. It was during one of these evenings that the homeowner discovered the first evidence of Marlene's deeper intentions. Among the formal letters was a subtle annotation, a red pen mark that suggested a timeline of expected compliance, with phrases like "immediate correction required" and "further action pending." This was no mere warning. It was a blueprint for escalation. Marlene had not only planned her interventions, but had anticipated the homeowner's responses, mapping out a series of steps designed to maintain pressure and assert dominance. The homeowner realized that winning this battle would require more than compliance or passive resistance. Documentation alone would not suffice. Strategic action was necessary. Each notice became a data point, a clue, and a potential lever to turn the conflict in favor of the homeowner. By observing patterns, predicting next moves, and preparing evidence, the homeowner began to transform from a passive recipient of Marlene's tactics into an active participant in the unfolding feud. As the days wore on, the homeowner noticed other signs of escalation. Marlene began to circulate rumors quietly among select neighbors, suggesting that the fence was not only unauthorized, but that the homeowner might be attempting to undermine community harmony. While nothing was outright, the subtle campaign of misinformation was unmistakable. It was a reminder that in conflicts like this, perception was as powerful as action, and that controlling the narrative could be as important as any physical evidence. The stakes were growing, and the homeowner recognized the delicate balance between assertiveness and overreaction. Too little resistance, and Marlene's authority would appear uncontested. Too much confrontation, and the homeowner risked appearing aggressive, potentially alienating neighbors or the HOA board. Every move had to be calculated, every response measured. The fence, once a simple addition to a backyard, had become the focal point of a complex, high-stakes social chess match. By the end of this chapter, the homeowner had fully entered a new realm of strategic vigilance. The notices, once minor annoyances, had become instruments of psychological warfare. The fence had evolved from a personal project into a symbol of resistance, a center of observation, and a catalyst for community-wide tension. What began as a simple desire for privacy had become a meticulous game of evidence, perception, and strategic positioning, with Marlene operating as both antagonist and architect of the conflict. The homeowner understood that the war of notices was only the beginning. Marlene's next move was unpredictable, yet inevitable, and the homeowner knew that preparation, documentation, and the careful use of allies would be critical in the days to come. The homeowner's quiet vigilance began to take on a new intensity as the days passed. What had once been casual observation became systematic surveillance. Cameras installed around the property captured not just the fence, but the entire street, creating a detailed visual record of activity. Every passerby, every neighborly glance, and most importantly, every movement by Marlene was recorded and timestamped. The homeowner spent hours reviewing footage, identifying patterns in her behavior when she walked past the fence, how long she lingered, and which neighbors she approached with whispers that carried a subtle undertone of authority. Each observation revealed more about the methods of control Marlene employed, and the homeowner began to understand that this was no ordinary HOA conflict. The surveillance revealed surprising details. Marlene did not simply patrol the neighborhood casually. She orchestrated her movements with precision, choosing times when she knew the homeowner would be absent or engaged elsewhere. Her visits to the fence were almost ritualistic, accompanied by small gestures, a notebook in hand, measuring tape tucked into her arm, pen scratching across paper that indicated more than mere curiosity. It was a form of inspection, a performance of power meant to assert dominance and instill a sense of accountability in the homeowner. Neighbors began to react to the tension as well. Some avoided the homeowner, entirely fearful of getting caught in the crossfire, while others approached with whispered anecdotes about Marlene's strict enforcement of rules, her uncanny knowledge of trivial violations, and her ability to turn minor incidents into formal HOA complaints. It became evident that Marlene's influence extended far beyond the fence. Her reputation as an enforcer of arbitrary rules had created an atmosphere of unease that affected the entire street. People walked more carefully, mowed their lawns with extreme precision, and avoided visible displays that could be interpreted as defiant. The homeowner's own behavior became more deliberate. Routine actions like taking out the trash or tending to the garden were now conducted with an awareness of potential observation. Every step was measured, every gesture considered, and every interaction with neighbors analyzed. The fence, once a simple boundary, had become a stage for performance, a visible declaration of autonomy and resistance. The homeowner understood that to withstand Marlene's scrutiny, it was not enough to build the fence. Every aspect of living with it had to be controlled, documented, and prepared for challenge. One morning, a new escalation appeared in the form of another note pinned to the fence. This one was more pointed, explicitly referencing measurements and compliance deadlines. The homeowner recognized it as an attempt to provoke a reaction, to test boundaries, and possibly to create grounds for an official HOA complaint. Instead of reacting emotionally, the homeowner added it to the growing archive, photographing it, scanning it, and noting the time it had been discovered. Each note was now part of a growing dossier, a record of harassment, manipulation, and persistent oversight. The surveillance also revealed Marlene's interactions with the HOA board. Footage captured meetings and casual conversations in which she subtly framed the homeowner as someone defiant, difficult, and potentially disruptive to community harmony. The homeowner realized that Marlene's strategy extended beyond the immediate confrontation. It was a coordinated campaign to influence perception, control narratives, and prepare a legal or bureaucratic case should the homeowner resist. The battle had moved from backyard disputes to the broader social and administrative networks of the neighborhood. As weeks passed, the homeowner noticed more direct attempts to provoke reactions. Tools were subtly rearranged in the yard, landscaping modifications were commented on by other neighbors, and photographs of the fence appeared mysteriously in email chains from the HOA. Marlene was testing limits, looking for vulnerabilities, and exploiting small mistakes to maintain psychological pressure. The homeowner understood that the key to countering this escalation was not confrontation but strategy. Careful documentation, consistent behavior, and the selective use of allies to build credibility. Allies began to emerge quietly. A few neighbors who had previously observed Marlene's tactics offered discreet support. They confirmed that they had received similar letters, noticed similar inspections, or witnessed suspicious interactions that aligned with the homeowner's experiences. These confirmations strengthened the homeowner's position, providing independent corroboration of Marlene's pattern of intimidation. By quietly networking and collecting testimonies, the homeowner began to transform from an isolated target into a participant in a coordinated effort to expose and resist Marlene's overreach. Meanwhile, Marlene's behavior grew more aggressive. She began taking photographs of the fence from different angles, occasionally entering the homeowner's property boundary under the guise of inspection. The homeowner, aware of the risks, captured these moments on camera, creating irrefutable evidence of trespass and harassment. The street itself seemed charged with tension. Subtle movements, hushed conversations, and even the pattern of parked cars took on new significance. Every moment outside the home was now part of a broader surveillance landscape, and the homeowner had to navigate it with precision and caution. The homeowner also began to notice psychological tactics in Marlene's approach. Some days, she would leave a note that appeared friendly or neutral, only to include hidden implications that cast doubt on the homeowner's compliance or judgment. On odder days, presence alone standing near the fence, glancing in the window, or pacing in the driveway was sufficient to unsettle and distract. The homeowner realized that the feud was not just about the fence but about control, intimidation, and the demonstration of dominance over perceived territory. The homeowner's strategy evolved accordingly. Cameras were repositioned to maximize coverage, schedules were adjusted to anticipate Marlene's patrols, and allies were consulted to ensure a broader awareness of neighborhood sentiment. Every note, every photograph, and every recorded interaction became part of a growing repository of evidence that could be used to counter any potential legal or bureaucratic claims. The homeowner was preparing for a confrontation that would require both patience and tactical planning, understanding that the escalation was likely to continue until the power dynamics were decisively addressed. As Chapter 3 drew to a close, the homeowner realized that the surveillance had accomplished more than capturing Marlene's actions. It had revealed the depth of her strategy, the extent of her influence, and the sophistication of her psychological tactics. The fence was no longer merely a physical barrier. It had become a central element in a complex social and administrative conflict. The homeowner understood that the next stage of the feud would require careful maneuvering, the judicious use of allies, and a readiness to escalate strategically. The next phase of the feud emerged quietly at first, but it carried a tension that was palpable to anyone who stepped onto the street. The homeowner, having meticulously documented weeks of surveillance, prepared to escalate the situation with a calculated approach. The strategy was clear. Confrontation would not be emotional or impulsive, it would be strategic, deliberate, and backed by evidence. The homeowner understood that Marlene thrived on chaos, on provoking reactions that could be spun against others. To succeed, every action had to be deliberate, every move anticipated, and every witness considered. Morning routines became tactical exercises. The homeowner observed patterns not just from prior footage but in real time, noting the timing of Marlene's patrols, the paths she took through the neighborhood, and even the subtle gestures she made while speaking with other residents. It was clear that Marlene's influence extended beyond the visible, reaching into casual conversations and informal neighborhood gatherings where she subtly controlled narratives. She had turned ordinary social interactions into a form of surveillance, ensuring that information about the fence and, by extension, the homeowner was always filtered through her lens. The homeowner decided to leverage this awareness by carefully controlling visibility. Every interaction with neighbors was calculated, appearing casual while simultaneously gathering intelligence about what Marlene might be saying or reporting. This approach revealed surprising details. Some neighbors, previously hesitant to speak, admitted under discreet questioning that they had received pointed comments or veiled warnings from Marlene. Others admitted that Marlene had misrepresented their conversations to the age, framing innocent remarks as criticism or complaints. The homeowner realized that confronting Marlene directly without preparation would be reckless. The power dynamics were far more complex than initially anticipated. The first direct action was subtle yet deliberate. The homeowner placed small, discreet markers near the fence markers designed to track tampering or unauthorized access. These were combined with additional cameras covering previously blind spots, ensuring that any attempt by Marlene to interfere could be captured unambiguously. The homeowner also prepared a timeline, correlating prior notes, photographs, and observations, creating a comprehensive dossier that outlined a consistent pattern of behavior. This preparation transformed suspicion into documented fact, removing ambiguity and creating a foundation for confrontation that could not be dismissed. Marlene, predictably, reacted to these changes. She appeared more frequently near the fence, occasionally lingering longer, sometimes glancing into the homeowner's windows with an intensity that suggested both scrutiny and frustration. The homeowner noticed that Marlene's behavior shifted subtly depending on the presence of other neighbors. She performed her inspections when fewer witnesses were present, and when others were nearby, she adopted a veneer of civility that masked her intent. This dual behavior confirmed what the homeowner had suspected. Marlene's tactics relied on perception management as much as direct action. The homeowner's awareness of the social landscape became a tool for influence. By carefully positioning themselves during neighborhood activities, the homeowner could observe Marlene's interactions, confirm the accuracy of reports, and identify potential allies. The quiet support of several neighbors grew steadily as more residents recognized that Marlene's scrutiny extended beyond the homeowner's property. Stories of petty fines, arbitrary warnings, and invasive inspections were shared, and the homeowner began to see the beginnings of a coalition forming in who had been affected by Marlene's enforcement but lacked evidence or courage to confront her directly. The confrontation itself began with small, controlled acts. The homeowner ensured that Marlene's attempts to measure or inspect the fence were documented clearly, photographing each step and maintaining times. These records were shared discreetly with the coalition of neighbors, creating a sense of collective awareness that slowly diminished Marlene's aura of control. The presence of witnesses, neighbors who observed Marlene lingering or photographing the fence, shifted the balance of power. The homeowner could now demonstrate that Marlene's behavior was not a casual concern, but a coordinated campaign of oversight and intimidation. Simultaneously, the homeowner began reviewing HOA records, comparing them with observations and photographs. Inconsistencies emerged. Complaints filed by Marlene were sometimes inaccurately represented. Deadlines were manipulated, and minor infractions were exaggerated to create an official record of known compliance. This research provided not only evidence of overreach, but also a roadmap for legal and administrative challenge. The homeowner realized that Marlene's influence relied heavily on procedural manipulation, and exposing these discrepancies could neutralize much of her power. Despite the preparation, the confrontation was not without risk. One afternoon, Marlene entered the homeowner's property boundary under the guise of measurement, a brazen act that went beyond polite surveillance. The homeowner, hidden behind a corner with a camera, captured the intrusion in real time. This moment crystallized the stakes. Marlene was willing to escalate physically to maintain dominance. The homeowner knew that patience, strategy, and evidence were now more critical than ever. Any emotional response could be exploited and reframed against them. By the end of this phase, the confrontation had shifted from subtle surveillance to visible, documented resistance. The homeowner's fence, once a private boundary, had become a focal point in a broader struggle over control, authority, and community perception. The homeowner now understood that victory would require not just endurance, but a multi-pronged approach: meticulous documentation, community support, and strategic engagement with the HOA. Every photograph, note, and recorded interaction was a piece of a larger narrative designed to counter Marlene's authority. As Chapter 4 drew to a close, the homeowner felt both tension and clarity. The path forward was visible but fraught with risk. The confrontation had begun, but the outcome remained uncertain. Patience, precision, and tactical awareness would determine whether the homeowner could maintain autonomy, expose Marlene's overreach, and transform a private dispute into a decisive moment of accountability. The stage was set for escalation, and every subsequent move would be pivotal. With the confrontation escalating but still under control, the homeowner realized that true resolution required formal engagement with the HOA. The private measure, documentation, neighbor coalitions had established undeniable evidence. But Marlene's influence within the HOA posed a unique threat. She was not just a neighbor enforcing arbitrary rules, she wielded institutional authority. And confronting her without using that platform would leave the homeowner at a strategic disadvantage. Preparation became paramount, and every detail had to be meticulously organized to withstand scrutiny. Weeks of evidence collection culminated in a comprehensive dossier. Photographs captured Marlene measuring the fence repeatedly, intruding on the homeowner's property, and documenting minor deviations in a manner inconsistent with HOA bylaws. Logs of dates, times, and witness statements were aligned with HOA complaint forms, revealing discrepancies in Marlene's reports. The homeowner included not only visual proof, but contextual analysis, demonstrating patterns of intimidation and selective enforcement that painted a broader picture of overreach. Community support, previously informal, transformed into structured advocacy. Neighbors who had quietly observed Marlene's actions or suffered similar experiences were invited to provide written testimonies, signed and dated, corroborating the homeowner's findings. The coalition now included homeowners who had endured excessive fines, vague violation notices, and unsolicited inspections. The homeowner carefully coordinated these contributions, ensuring that the HOA could not dismiss the issue as personal dispute or exaggeration. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. Members of the community filtered into the hall, some curious, others skeptical, and a few still cautious of Marlene's presence. The homeowner entered with the dossier in hand, aware that perception and preparation would be as important as the evidence itself. Every photograph, timestamp, and written account had to be presented with precision, eliminating ambiguity and neutralizing potential manipulation. When the discussion of neighborhood concerns opened, the homeowner presented the evidence methodically. Each photograph was shown with a corresponding log. Each neighbor testimony highlighted specific incidents, and every inconsistency in Marlene's complaints was clearly outlined. The homeowner emphasized patterns rather than isolated incidents, framing Marlene's behavior as a systematic effort to control, intimidate, and manipulate the community through selective enforcement. The impact was immediate. Murmurs of recognition spread through the room, and even previously hesitant HOA members leaned forward to examine the documentation. Marlene's response, as anticipated, was defensive. She denied any wrongdoing, framing the homeowner's claims as personal vendettas or exaggerations. However, the preemptive organization of evidence prevented her from gaining traction. Each denial was met with documented contradiction, and the combined weight of visual proof, timelines, and corroborating neighbor accounts left little room for manipulation. The homeowner's calm, fact-based presentation highlighted Marlene's methods rather than emotions, ensuring that the HOA could focus on procedure and policy rather than interpersonal conflict. The meeting's dynamic shifted further when neighbors provided live testimony. Each person described their experiences in measured, factual terms, confirming the pattern of selective enforcement and intimidation. These accounts painted a cohesive picture. Marlene had used her position to exert authority over minor infractions, escalate disputes unnecessarily, and create an environment of fear and compliance. The homeowner watched as the collective narrative unfolded, realizing that Marlene's carefully cultivated persona of community protector was unraveling in real time. The HOA board, previously hesitant to intervene, now faced undeniable evidence. Policies on property inspections, notice requirements, and enforcement procedures were invoked, showing that Marlene's repeated actions exceeded her authority and violated established guidelines. The homeowner ensured that each violation was linked to documented incidents, demonstrating not only procedural overreach, but intent and pattern. The combination of legal adherence and community testimony created a compelling case that the board could not ignore. As the meeting progressed, Marlene's composure visibly eroded. Her attempts to redirect attention, question motives, or challenge evidence were systematically countered by the homeowner's preparation. Each objection was anticipated, and the homeowner's prior documentation provided clear, indisputable rebuttal. The board members, initially neutral, began to express concern and request clarification, signaling that the tide of authority was shifting away from Marlene. The climax of the meeting came when the homeowner revealed the cumulative impact of Marlene's actions. The unnecessary stress imposed on neighbors, the intimidation used to suppress dissent, and the repeated overreach that had disrupted the community's cohesion. The visual evidence of repeated fence inspections, unauthorized measurements, and confrontations paired with neighbor testimonies left the room in near unanimous agreement. The narrative was no longer a single grievance, but a documented pattern affecting the entire neighborhood. Finally, the board deliberated and took formal action. Marlene was reprimanded for procedural violations, and her authority to enforce fines or conduct inspections was temporarily suspended pending review. Additionally, the HOA implemented a requirement for oversight and documentation for any future inspections, ensuring that no single individual could exert disproportionate control over the neighborhood. The homeowner's victory was both symbolic and practical. Marlene's influence had been curtailed, and systemic changes were enacted to prevent recurrence. As the meeting concluded, the homeowner felt a mixture of relief and vigilance. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the broader lesson was clear. Accountability required preparation, community collaboration, and strategic engagement with institutional processes. Marlene, though defeated in the formal arena, remained a presence in the neighborhood. The homeowner recognized that continued awareness and adherence to the new procedures would be essential to maintain stability and prevent retaliation. The HOA showdown marked a turning point. What had begun as a dispute over a fence had escalated into a community-wide revelation of overreach and manipulation. The homeowners' careful documentation, combined with coalition building and strategic presentation, had transformed personal grievance into collective action. The balance of power had shifted, demonstrating that even entrenched influence could be challenged when evidence, preparation, and community alignment converged. As the homeowners departed, conversations buzzed with acknowledgement of the homeowners' diligence and courage. The neighborhood, once overshadowed by Marlene's subtle tyranny, now glimpsed the possibility of fairness and transparency. While vigilance remained necessary, the precedent had been set. Deliberate, evidence-based action could restore balance, even in the face of entrenched authority. The weeks following the HOA showdown unfolded like a slow exhale after months of tension. The neighborhood, once dominated by subtle intimidation and whispered complaints, began to regain its sense of equilibrium. Homeowners ventured into their yards with a renewed confidence. Families held cookouts without the unease of imagined inspections, and the subtle dread that had accompanied every fence measurement or lawn comment slowly dissipated. The homeowner, who had borne the brunt of Marlene's overreach, found that the months of preparation, observation, and documentation had created lasting change beyond personal vindication. Marlene's reaction to the formal reprimand was both predictable and revealing. While her overt authority had been curtailed, her influence remained latent, lingering in the corners of neighborhood dynamics where subtle manipulation had previously thrived. She avoided public confrontations, no longer standing in the front yards of neighbors with measuring tape in hand. Yet, she continued to murmur, attempt indirect persuasion, and seek alliances with those who had once supported her. The homeowner observed these behaviors quietly, understanding that control had shifted not because of anger or confrontation alone, but because institutional oversight and community unity had created a new framework of accountability. In practical terms, the HOA implemented policies to ensure that no single individual could operate unchecked. Any inspection now required prior notice, documentation of observed issues, and board approval before fines could be levied. Complaint procedures were clarified, timelines formalized, and records maintained to prevent selective enforcement. These changes, although procedural on the surface, symbolized a cultural shift. The neighborhood now valued fairness, transparency, and collective oversight over unilateral control. The homeowner recognized that the real victory was not just in reprimanding Marlene, but in transforming the system she had exploited. Neighbors began to share subtle acknowledgments, small gestures that spoke volumes. A retired couple across the street left freshly baked cookies with a note of thanks. A young family planted flowers along the common pathway, waving with genuine warmth instead of cautious hesitation. Conversations, once brief and strained, extended into planning block parties and community projects. The homeowner, once wary of every interaction, found a quiet satisfaction in observing these changes. It was a reassurance that the months of conflict had not been in vain, that vigilance and methodical action had tangible, positive outcomes for the entire street. Despite the positive shifts, the homeowner remained aware of the lingering presence of Marlene. She had retreated from overt actions, but retained her sense of entitlement, her desire to influence events from behind the scenes. There were subtle reminders. pointed comments at HOA meetings, selective critiques of minor issues, and occasional attempts to challenge new policies. Yet each attempt was met with procedural clarity, collective oversight, and the confidence of a neighborhood that had learned to act in unison. Marlene's influence, once intimidating, had been diminished to a shadow present but powerless. The homeowner took deliberate steps to maintain the momentum. Monthly informal gatherings encouraged neighborly communication, providing opportunities to address minor concerns before they escalated. A neighborhood newsletter, coordinated with HOA approval, highlighted achievements, reminders of policy, and community engagement projects. By creating structured avenues for information flow and collaboration, the homeowner ensured that transparency became part of the neighborhood culture, effectively neutralizing the environment that had allowed unchecked influence to flourish. Marlene's final attempts to regain authority, subtle though they were, eventually drew no attention. The community had grown accustomed to collective oversight, and her comments, suggestions, and criticisms were met with calm acknowledgement or procedural redirection. The homeowner observed these interactions, understanding that change is not immediate, but cumulative. Over time, the culture of vigilance, documentation, and community unity became self-reinforcing, ensuring that past patterns could not easily repeat. In personal terms, the homeowner experienced a profound sense of closure. The months of tension, observation, planning, and coalition building had culminated not only in Marlene's formal reprimand but in the transformation of the neighborhood into a space of fairness and accountability. The struggle over the fence, initially a personal grievance, became a catalyst for systemic change. The homeowner reflected on the journey from quiet suspicion to active documentation, 2. Strategic action. Realizing that patience, meticulousness, and a commitment to process had created enduring results. The neighborhood itself bore visible signs of the transformation. Lawns were maintained without fear of arbitrary critique. Driveways were clear, fences stood according to regulations rather than subjective interpretation, and communal spaces reflected shared pride rather than compliance-induced anxiety. Neighbors engaged in dialogue openly, resolving minor disagreements through discussion rather than intimidation. Children played freely in yards that once felt surveilled, and families hosted gatherings with an ease that had been absent during Marlene's informal reign. Marlene's presence, while still tangible, became a cautionary tale rather than a controlling force. Conversations among neighbors occasionally referenced her behavior, not in fear but as a lesson in vigilance, documentation, and collective action. The homeowner's methodical approach, from observation to coalition building to formal HOA engagement, was recognized as the blueprint for addressing not only property disputes but patterns of influence that threaten community cohesion. The street, once overshadowed by subtle oppression, now thrived in a balance of oversight, participation, and transparency. Ultimately, the feud over the fence resolved more than the physical boundary between properties. It exposed the mechanisms of control, revealed the power of collective action, and established procedural safeguards that ensured fairness for all. Marlene's attempts to dominate the neighborhood were neutralized, her authority curtailed, and the community emerged stronger and more united. The homeowner, reflecting on the months of effort, understood that persistence, preparation, and strategic engagement were the true instruments of change.